Well, as a native Californian, in my lifetime, I've seen dramatic shift in, one, the composition of our public schools, and two, the status of our public schools in terms of the state's commitment to financing a solid, good public education. So when I was a youngster in the Compton Unified School District, it was a good education. We had good teachers. A certain percentage of our kids went on to college. If not, they got good jobs in industry and elsewhere. And then post-1970s, we've seen a precipitous drop, right? So a place like Compton that went through a demographic transformation suffered even worse. But it's also a story of how the citizenry and our elected officials have backed off that commitment to public education. And consequently, we have public schools in the state of California that are in dire shape. So one just has to look at the demographics of the public school enrollment for our children in the state of California. And it's such a different story today than when I was a youngster, 50 years ago in Southern California schools. And that reality really prompts us to think about the old policies. So for example, when you have an increasingly diverse population, the old policy was integration. That doesn't make sense anymore because in our metropolitan areas, in our cities and our suburbs, not only in California but across the country, they are majority minority. So hearkening back to an era when, well, let's integrate and that'll be the way we can expose these kids of color to the white children and better, that doesn't work. So it means really a reconsideration of major policies, historical policies. So policies of integration make no sense anymore. Policies of how you take a disadvantaged, impoverished, English language learner predominant population and think of ways that we can turn them into academic achievers, school achievers, then it sets a different policy agenda, which has to be new ways to think about how you advance their language, English language capabilities, and from that, everything else will flow. So you've got to start somewhere, and English language learners is a huge area that needs to be addressed. I don't think there is an option. You can't ignore the problem, because if you ignore the problem, we see the consequences. If you have a diverse student population that is impoverished or unemployed as they become adults, they don't have educational leverage for jobs, we see what the consequences are, and there are things that we just don't want to acknowledge, unfortunately. So there is no option, in my opinion, to other than reinvesting, recommitting to producing students who are going to be productive citizens of the nation. Because the alternative is almost unthinkable. Do we just continue to grow more prisons? Yes, that's what we've done in the last 30 years. Do we simply just allow a growing number of the majority of our children to be uneducated, undereducated, and unemployed citizens, adults? No, that just doesn't make sense. So if we start from the option, our only option is to change this, then it's a different point of departure than saying, oh, well, let's just let it, it's no harm, we just let it go. Letting it go is almost unthinkable. Well, I think history gives us some important benchmarks and lessons. You can go back a little more than 100 years ago when America's public schools, especially in the eastern half of the nation, were completely overrun by the children of Southern and Central and Eastern European immigrants. The largest wave of immigrants ever to come to the United States, about 20 million between 1880 and 1920. And so the progressives, for all their faults, and they had many faults, at least were common sense kind of approach. What do we do with these kids? We have to, one, Americanize them, right? We have to make sure they speak English, and we have to give them skills so they can go into the industrial economy as productive workers. Now, we're in a very different situation, but those things still pertain. Don't we want to make them productive citizens of the nation, employed citizens of the nation? And yes, don't we want to provide them with the vehicles to learn English and become fluent English speakers of the nation. All those things that the progressives thought about as core ideas to change policy are still with us today. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to the policies of the progressives, but the idea of the progressives still resonate with us today.